Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and get started. This is awesome to see so many people come out. So, real quick, I'm Danny Howerton. I'm a threat analyst here at Proofpoint. Pretty much my main responsibilities here at Proofpoint are looking at attacks, looking at attackers, malware, kind of tracking all of those, writing campaigns for our matchers so people can start seeing them in our dashboard. Turn it.
Awesome, and I'm Kelsey. I'm on the product marketing team at Okta. So I oversee our security solutions, so how we work with different folks across the security organization to leverage identity and access management. We're also aware that this is a fun surprise behind us, so if we make a sudden start, that's because we have new friends coming in. But we are excited today to talk to you about Credential, how we can protect against credential theft. We thought we would start off today with some of our favorite folks. I think Krebs kicked us off well this morning. Did anyone see this when it was in the news? Yes. For those of you who haven't, that's Kanye. That's him typing in all zeros to his PIN code on his phone. Yes. We probably all have a Kanye in our organization, right? We probably also all have some other common users. We have the too trusting guy who reads that email, and of course it's legitimate. He's definitely going to click that link. My personal favorite, the knows it's a fish and clicks anyway guy. We all know that there are going to be people in our organization that are just compelled to, for whatever reason, go ahead and click that link or go ahead and open that email. And so really what we wanted to do today is to talk a little bit more about what can you do about these people so that you don't end up feeling like this. And just so we can get a quick understanding of the room, how many folks in here are using or familiar with Okta? Small handful. How about Proofpoint? Awesome. Well, you're going to find out a little bit more about both of us today, and also, more importantly, how you can use our solutions together so you can stop some of this. Just a little bit additional context too. Why is this so hard, particularly today? We heard again this morning from Krebs talking about the challenge of cloud security, right? And really when we start to take a look at that, we see it from this point of view, right? You have all of these different resources that your users are going to need to manage access into. There's also all of these different user types, and they need to access those resources from different devices, potentially from their own mobile device, from a variety of locations around the world. Which means that as security professionals, it's our job to make sure that we're mitigating the risk in managing all of this complexity, which can be challenging, and attackers know it. And Brian stole my thunder on my 81% stat again this morning, but we're just going to go with continuity here. Right, over 80% of data breaches are caused by compromised or stolen credentials. And again, our users aren't making it any easier on us when we look at things like targeting or reusing passwords. Is anyone familiar in here with haveibeenpwned.com, Troy Hunt's website? Right? How many of you have taken a user and just showed them that and said, have you seen your password has been exposed everywhere? No, it's not necessary. It's not your fault, but it is on the internet now, and we need to use a different password. Right? And so the thing about this is, and again, Krebs talked about this morning, attackers don't have to hack in, they can just log in. And the thing is, they also know it. This is a very easy attack vector, and what we need to do is to find different ways to protect against this type of threat. So today's session, we're going to talk a little bit more about trends that we're seeing across the industry. We're very lucky to have Danny here to talk us through that. Then we'll most importantly get through some of those prevention strategies, and then we should have some time for Q&A at the end. Cool? Awesome. So I'll turn it over to Danny.
Cool. All right.
Oh, I got too excited. For those of you who aren't familiar with Okta, very quick background. So Okta's mission is to enable any organization to use any technology. What that means is that all of your users should be able to use all of the resources that they need to do their jobs securely and easily. More specifically, if you're not familiar with our solution, that comes in a couple of different flavors. So if you are familiar with Okta, the part you're probably most familiar with is SSO, so this dashboard here. If you're an employee of an organization, you would sign in and get access to the applications that you need for your job. On the flip side, we also enable you to take that strong authentication and build it into other applications. So a couple of examples we've put up here, MLB.com. So on opening day this past year, if you sign into MLB.com, you're actually signing in to Okta on the back end. There are a number of examples of this, but you can take that same strong authentication and build it into your customer-facing applications as well. And I put my favorite security buzzword on here, which is zero trust. We do all of this. When we talk about zero trust, really what we mean is making sure that the right users have the right level of access at the right time, and that we're assessing that continuously. So from both of these standpoints, we're making sure that your users have access just to the resources that they need and no more, and that we're applying additional layers of context, and you can prompt for a second factor to step up when needed. So when we talk about the identity attacks landscape, we talk about it in a few different buckets. So there's certainly the creation standpoint. This is what, typical fraud type attacks. So identity theft. We also look at things like account takeover. So everything from phishing to credential theft to credential stuffing, password spray. And we've differentiated lockout here from account takeover just for the purpose of what they're trying to do, right? Again, you'll see a few duplicates on both of those, but the intent for the attacker is to lock out your systems versus to take over their accounts. So what we wanted to spend the most time on today, which is everyone's favorite topic, phishing. And now I'm really going to turn things over to Danny to talk a little bit more about that.
Phishing. Cool. All right. This slide is completely 100% anecdotal. Just up front, it is me throwing things at a dartboard and going, that looks cool. But really, it's here to kind of convey a message. And really what it is in our data we've seen in the last 2-3-ish years, that is really, volume is significantly down. So no longer are the days of ransomware spraying everybody on the internet, trying to play what I call the dating game approach. Spray as many messages out, try and get as big of a click-through as possible, because if you get 1%, the larger pool creates a larger 1%. So we're not seeing that anymore. We're seeing attacks starting to get way more targeted, much lower volume, creativity is going significantly up. So what that means is the lures in phishing messages are getting more creative, they're getting more well done, and it's only going to a handful of people in the org as opposed to org-wide. So let's go ahead and look through kind of the data. This is year over year, everything coming out of our TAP sandbox. With, if you can't read it, the legend at the top says malicious URL messages are in the dark blue, light blue are malicious attachment messages. So it's really cool to see the trends go year over year. So 2013, 2014, and then into 2015 was predominantly URL-based threats that we were seeing, good exploit kits way back when. And then 2015, you start to see kind of the trend move more towards attachments. 2016, it really blew up and maxed that graph out. At the top of that, I think it was in August of 2016, we were seeing upwards of 50 million messages a day sprayed out mainly by, it's a threat group we call TA505. We pretty much, they were responsible for the majority of all of the Locky stuff. So anytime you heard all the big news articles about Locky and ransomware, that was generally them. Or this is the name that we give that group. So then you can move into 2017 and start kind of seeing that change, started to see some larger URL type campaigns, and then into the last 2 years where it's pretty much been predominantly URL based threats, which I mean makes sense to me. Everyone's moving to the cloud, things are all URL based. So let's zoom in, we can kind of get a better idea of better scaling issues here. So you can start really see that significant drop off from 17 into 18 and 19. And then really nothing has changed so far this year, but we're too early to really figure that out. Continue zooming in, you can kind of get a little bit of a better picture of the last 2 years. Obviously attachment threats are around, but URLs, it's pretty significant. And what I really kind of like looking at these in the peaks and valleys is you can really start picking up the weekends, because what's the point in sending a large campaign to somebody who's not in front of their computer? They're all in it to make money, so that makes sense. So going into the actual, like, behind the URLs, what are some of the things that we tend to see? It's phishing, 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 phishing. It's not sexy, but it's the predominant threat that we see. Why? Because it works. And like I said, everything is going to cloud-based authentication. Why? You don't need to hack into an organization if you can just log in. So it makes sense. We have seen a significant uptick in the last 2-ish years with direct links to documents themselves. So whether it's a docx or an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF, most of the time hosted on public repositories, Dropbox, Google Drive, SharePoint's my favorite. Compromised SharePoint sites are used a lot because SharePoint is safe, right? We use that internally. That's controlled by our IT security guys. You just didn't notice that it was somebody else's SharePoint that you're downloading stuff from. Links to zip downloader scripts. And this one, even with a lot of IT people, I don't think they quite understand that Windows has a built-in JavaScript interpreter to it. So if you have a JavaScript file, you can double-click that and get execution like an exe. Obviously, attackers are using that. That's very handy. So we're seeing a lot of those, not only in attachments in the emails, but links to then go download and requiring the end user to execute it on their behalf. But pretty much predominantly, if we're talking about volume, it's all phishing, pretty much. Exploit kits, we did see a little bit of a spike on that at the end of last year, which kind of that's pretty interesting. I'm super curious to see if that's going to continue into this year, because normally my talk track has been exploit kits are mostly dead. So we'll check that out and see if that's actually coming to fruition in 2020. So here's some data of all of last year. We spread out all the things that we see, and we can actually separate corporate and consumer-based credential phishing. Kind of a blurry line a little bit, because like Google, is that consumer or is that corporate? A lot of corporate uses Google for their email solutions. So it's kind of, best guess of us and really kind of, which one to tie certain phishing pages to. When we first started differentiating this, it was really interesting. I think it was 2017 we started differentiating the two, and we saw consumer was just like blowing everything away, consumer-based phishing, and then that after about a year it switched over to corporate-based. So that's going to be your Office 365 kind of stuff predominantly. So yeah, kind of interesting there. So I said phishing is getting more creative, and that's absolutely true. We are seeing new lures for companies that you wouldn't expect to see a lot of phishing happen to. So these are just some of the ones that I pulled out, the things that we saw recently. These surprise us all of the time. I know specifically, WeChat. I know that's big in the APAC region. It's not something I'm necessarily always exposed to. So it's really cool to start going through screenshots of all these phishing landing pages that we've been seeing, and you see that pop up and go, oh, okay. Then we can start looking at targeting. Are those actually targeted at users in that region? Is it sprayed out globally? And then you can kind of start building intelligence on the attackers that are sending these kind of things out. I remember the days where it used to be just like PayPal significantly for all of the phishing links. No longer. So here's a fun graph that is the unique malicious URLs that we have seen globally. A little bit of issues with the tool. You might see it tab out, kind of stack out, but really it's there to say, hey, obviously it just kind of reinforces everything that I've been saying already. We're seeing much more of this. But this is not specifically towards volume of any specific thing. It is unique. So we're only going to count one specific URL once in this graph. So really kind of a cool explosion of all of that. So seeing quite a bit of that. So this is kind of how moving into kind of what we call a people-centric approach, and us as a company here at Proofpoint, we're kind of really putting our flag in this mound, and really kind of this is where we are going as a company, and we are pushing this fairly hard. But you'll kind of see, traditional defenders, POV is really, firewalls work. They've been around for forever. So, attackers go around said firewalls, and obviously cloud services and stuff that kind of bypasses a lot of that infrastructure. So we see a lot of attackers doing their due diligence before they even send anything malicious. So it really is doing a lot of OSINT on the organizations that they're targeting, try and find the users at that organization that is going to most benefit them, and then specifically crafting messages to them specifically. LinkedIn is a gigantic, amazing repository of data for that. So they do that, and so we saw all of this happening, and really we started trying to figure out how best to approach the problem with people attacking, attackers attacking people instead of more infrastructure type stuff. So we started looking at, organizations, their structures, the people they worked for, and what everybody did, and created this model that basically takes all of the attack data that me and my team generate and we create and maintain and kind of gamify it. Well, not gamify, more scoreify than anything else. So we take a score and then have various other factors that ups or lowers that score to kind of try and surface the more interesting stuff to everybody that's actually interacting with the product and defending organizations. So we like to take in, who's the people in the organization that see more attacks than anybody else? Are they highly privileged? And do they click a lot on URLs? So are they more vulnerable to somebody else who doesn't necessarily click on these things? Before we did that, that's kind of what our old People-Centric report looked like. It was just volume-based. It was like the info at email address got hounded, webmaster at whatever, just got significantly more traffic than the rest, obviously because it's public facing and everybody knows it. This is kind of a slide that kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier with how we score things. I should have taken that last slide out anyway. Oh well. So really kind of to walk through this real quick. So we'll take actor sophistication into account. So let's say you get hit by an APT government sponsored type threat, immediately you get a score of 800. Now if it hits everybody in your country, then we can bring the score down. If you're 1 of 5, you can bump it up a little higher. And really just kind of the more interesting things really start getting up to the top. Are they using commodity malware that anybody on the internet can buy or purchase? Are they using custom malware? All of that kind of goes into this score of our attack index thing. So what that turns into is something way more interesting like this, and you start seeing everybody in the org who not only sees the most, but is also being hit with the most severe stuff, things like that. And you start seeing the people at the organization that you wouldn't necessarily expect to be the most targeted. One of the fun anecdotes that I have there is I have a colleague who was looking into the airline industry because we have a lot of airline customers. And after looking at the org chart and job titles of the entire organization, we found that across that industry, the most targeted job title included the word cargo. And we kind of went, that's weird, we didn't expect that. But then all of the airlines went, yeah, absolutely, that's that's significant. They're generally higher privileged than other people in the organization, so we get it. I learned something new today. And whenever we take this into customers, it's a lot of times things surprise everybody on what's actually happening. So cool. Turn it back over.
Hello again. All right, so now what do you do about all of this? So we have this insight into who are the most attacked users in your organization. How can we actually protect them against some of these threats? So and making sure we're clarifying there's Okta and there's Proofpoint, and they are two separate solutions. And what we can do is to bring together that insight that Proofpoint has onto your most attacked users in your organization. And Okta, which has that identity management solution, can then take those users and you can set policies against that specific user group. So for example, and we'll go through a few more details, but maybe I want to require a higher assurance factor with these very attacked people. Or maybe I want to, for specific applications, they can only access them while on a corporate network or while on a corporate owned device. So we'll go through some of those examples here in just a sec. Do you want to run through what this is that dashboard again?
Yeah. So, don't fall. So this is our dashboard. So whenever you buy Tap, and this is a little tab on the left, a little person, so People-Centric. So you can start searching through all of the, we call them VAPs, or very attacked people. Generally, whenever I come into this dashboard, I'll always come over to the attack index column and start sourcing by, max threat severity is the one I generally use. Attack index is going to be the aggregation, not necessarily aggregation, but that's the best word for it, of all of the scores that a specific user sees. So you can start seeing the users that see more than everybody else and at a higher rate. But I generally like to look at the max threat severity. So if that's pegged out all of the way, that this is something that you really want attention to now. So you can start going that, and I know there's some animation you can click into each individual user, filters, threat severity. Yeah, I talked about that. Yay. Cool. And then you can start getting, a lot of, this is your guys' stuff, right? This is ours? Okay. Sorry, I'm a threat guy. I'm not a sales guy. But yeah, so you can start looking at graphs to really kind of see. So person at the very top, you can start saying, oh yeah, banking Trojans are really high up on that list. It might be hard to see. Consumer Credential, download, just kind of all of the blue stuff, all the way into kind of darker rat type malware at the end. So that would be something that I would totally look into right off the bat. Make sure that you're responding to all of the things that need to be responded to. Cool.
Yes, and from there, you can bring those users again via an API into Okta. So Okta allows you to bring in and master users from a variety of sources. So if that's your on-prem directory, like AD or LDAP, if you're using an HR system, we can also bring that data in from Proofpoint. So you have a group that's specifically called your VAP group. And what you can do with that is then set specific policies for that VAP group. So Okta authentication policies can be everything from password requirements, it can be authentication policies, factor enrollment. Again, I mentioned some of that specific app access or app sign-on, as well as user roles and entitlements within specific applications. So this is just an example of what that rule looks like. Taking it a step further, here are some ways that you can go deeper on how do you want to set those policies. So if I want to require that users in that VAP group, not only are they in the VAP group, but potentially I want to say if there is an abnormal behavior from that specific user group. So we can detect if a user is signing in from a new device, from a new location, from a new IP address, from a variety of different attributes. So you can set if the behavior is abnormal for a specific attribute or just holistically. That's what that risk score will do. It'll say if this is an abnormal behavior for that user, then go ahead and prompt for reauthentication. And then again, from that factor side, we enable you to use a variety of different factor choices. So here I've chosen to use WebAuthn since it's a stronger phishing resistant factor. So if you're using a hardware that has built-in biometric, like the fingerprint reader on your MacBook, you can go ahead and use that. You can also use a variety of third-party sources like a YubiKey to go ahead and set that. And so you can, if you choose, you can require that they use that higher assurance factor. You can also sequence them in whatever order you want. So if you actually want them to use the WebAuthn before they use a password, you can go ahead and do that. Or if you just don't want them to use a password at all. Krebs was anti-password, so you can go ahead and eliminate that from this flow, period. You can also see too, we do offer you to shorten the session lifetime. That is the session within Okta. We can't control your downstream session within the application, but at least your Okta session, they'll have to reauthenticate. So a couple of other just pieces of context that go into this. So best practices, generally speaking, we prefer you on the right side of when you're using different factor options. So please don't we want to go away from passwords. Let's move away from that. Definitely things we talked about, SIM jacking this morning. Again, moving away from SMS and security question, which tend to be more easily spoofed factors, and moving towards those stronger biometric security key type or a push within an application. We do have a bunch of resources if you're interested in just how I can best configure my environment. I have a QR code for you. So this is just a resource that we worked with our security team on how to put in best practices for configuring things like MFA within your environment. So that's that. We do have a variety of other resources too for best protection. I know we work with Proofpoint very closely on better protecting email, for example, if you're using Office 365, how we can help step up your security around those. But we did want to leave some time for questions as well. I saw someone did it. So with that, what can we answer? Yes, sir.
So it actually kind of fits in well with your last slide because you had an example on there. URL shorteners.
Yes.
bit.ly, goo.gl, et cetera, et cetera. What is your kind of opinion on how those should be actioned on in terms of your emails? Because I know you're saying that unique URLs are used, it's a big vector now. Should we just totally ignore that as an organization? Do we have to have some
No.
sort of...
Definitely don't ignore it. I know from our side, we don't care if it's shortened. We detonate URLs like we would any other. With our product, there's two main ways that we detonate URLs in a sandbox. The biggest one is at click time. So it requires rewriting of the link to then we see that somebody clicked on it, and then we can send it off to the sandbox to actually get detonated. And it'll follow the full chain all the way up to an end page. So it really doesn't matter. The others, just to come full circle, the other big mechanism that we use is a predictive engine that looks at volume and velocity. I think that's very simply way to put it, but look at those factors to then try and proactively detonate URLs in the sandbox before a user clicks on it so we can get a condemnation or not. But yeah, look at those and that's how we deal with it. Yes?
The best practices you have up there, does your software tell you about that, how to improve passwords, how to do the best practices for MFA? Will it give you, a 6-character password on my domain when it say, okay, you should go up to 12?
Yes. So Okta released, actually a couple months ago, we have something called Security Health Insight that will actually go through and perform a live audit of your environment and say, hey, you're using weak passwords for these specific groups. You may want to consider using a higher assurance factor for these specific groups, basically just to best practices aligned with, for example, NIST and above. But we're also looking for, if there are other areas that you would like for us to be auditing, we would love that feedback too. This is way more fun if there's more questions, guys. Yes?
So I don't know if the last question answered it, but I'm looking at point number 2, improved password policies. Based off of your experience and what you've seen with how organizations out there are currently implementing their password policies, are there any sort of tips when you say improve password policies or anything that you would suggest if we were to assume that we were all sort of on the same level where we're currently at with our current password policies? Any advice as to where we can bring that in terms of improvements? Yeah,
so we do, one of the pieces of the password policy, I think Krebs was really helpful for teeing up this session, but was checking for commonly used passwords for one, so making sure that that box is checked so no users can be using unfortunately that list is still password 123 and 123456, right? So you just eliminate that. That is not allowed. I think the recommendations that we make as a part of that are also going to increase complexity or align the complexity with what the industry standards are. I know some of the industry standards have been a little slower to catch up on requiring a certain number of numbers versus special characters. So making sure that a password is memorable but also has the length and complexity that isn't just numbers and special characters, right? It shouldn't just be a sequence of random things. So aligning to that. So that's what will prompt you within there. We do also have an open source tool. It's free for actually any user can use it. It's called Pass Protect. and it basically hits the Have I Been Pwned API. So it's a browser extension. It uses k-anonymity, so we're not actually sending any passwords back and forth. But it will check the Have I Been Pwned API. So if you're typing in a password to any application, whether or not it's connected to Okta, it will let you know if that password has been exposed. We've also put that code up so anyone can review it, or if you want to build it into your own application to say, users, you can't use this because it's already been exposed, you can do that too. I don't know if that quite answered your question, but we're trying to, we're trying to get rid of the password as much as we can. Yes, sir.
I apologize to Proofpoint. I'm not familiar enough with Proofpoint, so I'm going to make an assumption that it's cloud-based. Is there an on-prem solution?
We do have an on-prem solution if you absolutely need it, but we generally like to promote the cloud thing because we can push updates to it.
So I actually have a second part to the question, and this is about, you touched on sandboxing, file URL detonation.
Mm-hmm.
So if we are subscribed to the cloud-based service, where does the sandboxing, the detonation actually occur? The concern is data residency and privacy.
Right.
Does that occur in a specific geographical region, specifically Canada, or does that occur elsewhere?
As far last I checked, we didn't have any kind of data center connectivity in Canada. We are working on it, from what I am told. But all of the sandbox detonation does happen in the cloud. None of that. Even if you got an on-prem email solution, you would then have to send it up to the sandbox for all of that detonation. I know I can dig up all of the details on how long we keep that. I know we do a really good job at it because it's mainly a pain to me, but I don't get to see email, like raw email data on looking at stuff. Generally, it's only when something is condemned, I have a small window to potentially look at like maybe the attachment or the landing page of the URL, and then it goes away and all I have is the forensics from the sandbox run. So yeah, Jamie?
So just to expand on that I'm Proofpoint. So Bill 35 allows us a little bit of flexibility there. A lot of my public sector customers, especially British Columbia, will actually use the sandboxing but put it in replication mode. So there's absolutely zero data residency issues there. Obviously, kind of the 0-day type of stuff that we're going to be able to look at, we're actually detonating it. There's a little bit of limit in exposure there, but the reality of it is the amount of emails that we see on a daily basis, having our customers in reputational mode, there really isn't that much of a delta or difference between the detonation. To add on to Danny's point too, just from an investment standpoint, we do have cloud services in Canada for our core protection product, so the spam and the malware, and that's dual data centers in Canada. But we are looking to further invest in terms of the capacity for URL and attachments. So we can do US today or EU.
Anyone else? Otherwise, we can wrap up early. Yes, sir.
Is the primary use case here just for internal corporate users, or is this very scalable into the customer-centric side? Specifically, my question is coming in terms of we have millions of customers that are using through iOS, Android, web app, whatever the case might be, and there's various different services that they're using, critical transactions, that kind of thing. And there's so many different ways to connect in. Is this scalable to the side where you can say that we can track, identify, and manage millions of credentials and customers within that environment? Or what's the primary use case?
I think the primary use case when we launched this was for your workforce, so that includes employees, partners, contractors. We do have solutions that are for that broader customer use case. I don't think our current integration is oriented towards that right now.
I don't know.
But I don't know. Yes?
Question regarding you mentioned it's recommended to move away from password toward biometrics, but how do you think employees would be, say, comfortable storing your biometrics with the company?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. So when it's talking about different factor recommendations, so how can I use which factors can I use based on what's comfortable for my user base, right? Not everyone is as comfortable with using something like WebAuthn or biometric. Are there other options that we can give them that still have a stronger assurance or a higher assurance factor, but maybe are going to be more comfortable for my user base? So something like a push notification on an app. So we have something called Okta Verify, which is just an app that you can on your device get a push and affirm it within the device. So we do have things like that are alternate options. I think we do see things like WebAuthn or Windows Hello or something like that that enables you to use the built-in authenticators of your devices, which tend to be more convenient and certainly are higher assurance. But we want to make sure we give you that flexibility so that if your user base isn't comfortable with that, they have an option. They have other options. Yeah.
You have, as one of the recommendations, security awareness training. Can you elaborate on what would be the security awareness implications of putting this on?
Yes. So I think that comes back to our very first part. I love GIFs. I try to put them as many places as I can. But to the top of this conversation, right? A lot of this comes down to your end users. And when we're talking about this morning, there is going to be that person who clicks the phishing link no matter what. So if we can make sure that we're doing as much user awareness training as possible, we don't have a specific within Okta. I think
We do.
They do.
Wombat security is our big thing. So I don't know, couldn't tell you much about it. Again, I'm not a sales guy, but Jamie's in the back and I'd love to tell you about it.
Yes.
I'll give you the 10 second. A lot of our customers today will take that VAP data, like my most attacked users, and then transition that over to their security awareness teams on, number one, that's how we want to fish those users now so they become a little bit more resilient and receptive to those types of attacks. But also from a training perspective, if I see those users are constantly getting credential phished or we're seeing a lot of rats or backdoors, then I want to tailor my training to that type of data set and information as well.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah?
We're all friends.
So we subscribe to Wombats, and we're a little hesitant to lower the trust rate for things that would be effective phishing campaigns. So we don't want to kind of give the impression to our customer base that all HR mails related to our HRIS system might be fraudulent, or our partners could do questionnaire employee surveys and stuff like that. Do you have any, how do you do an effective phishing campaign without essentially ruining the trust of existing partners that you work with externally?
So that's a much bigger conversation around, and I'll answer this two ways. So we then start getting into the supplier partner type of attacks and those chain attacks. So we can address those types of things. When I go in and talk to customers about building an effective security awareness platform, and I think Brian talked about it earlier today, like, yeah, we want to see our click rates going down, but when I go in and talk to our customers, I want to see our report rates going up. Who are the users that are a little bit more leery and wary of those, and are they reporting that back to IT? I would rather have an email sit in limbo for an hour and have IT look at it and inspect it and send it back to the user saying, great job, thanks, it's a good clean email. So I want a little bit of paranoia with our end users, quite frankly, because like Danny and I work very closely. The stuff that we see today, it is fascinating. It's so interesting in terms of how the attackers are trying to get around technology, whether that's delayed URL. So something that we may not have seen yet, that's a legit URL, we're going to deliver it, that sits in your end user's inbox. They then weaponize it an hour later, a day later, a week later when they know it's in the inbox. So how do we as security professionals deal with that type of an attack? Well, let's get our users being a little bit more wary. Let's maybe send it up for a little bit more inspection. There's additional controls, whether it's through Proofpoint, Okta, isolation technologies and things like that. Let's put a little bit more adaptive controls around that place. So again, my response to that is I want paranoia, and I want a little bit of caution with these types of attacks, because again, the stuff that we're seeing, it's truly fascinating how they're getting around technology and social engineering us to open and close.
Yes.
So
you talked about very attack people identifying the users that are more susceptible to attacks. But how do you identify those users when the phishing is happening through channels that are non-monitored? So, for example, if you're getting a lot of smishing text messages, then how do you go about identifying those people?
Yeah, I don't see a lot of smishing type stuff just because obviously you can't necessarily monitor it, at least from our end. So without looking at the marketplace and seeing what solutions are available, I would say I don't know.
So are those policies more sort of for a corporate phishing than consumer phishing?
Yeah, so when I differentiated between corporate and consumer phishing, that was mainly to like the landing page. So is it a Google phish? Is it an Office 365 phish? Is it Dropbox? Is it Blackboard for the education folks? Stuff like that. So that's how we differentiate that as opposed to the actual mechanism, because we just see a lot of email. That's our primary thing. Yeah.
One here.
Oh, one here first. No, I'll let you MC.
Jason.
Okay, could you explain why like an email quarantine system isn't really enough to stop these phishing attacks?
So why the email quarantine isn't enough to stop the attacks?
Yeah, say for example, it's a email post. Do you think that would be sufficient, or do you think there should be extra layers of security?
Well, generally, whenever you're taking an email away from in front of an end user, that's going to pay dividends, specifically if it's something that has been condemned as malicious. So, say yeah, absolutely.
All right, we'll do last two quick ones, and then we'll do more specific questions at the booth so we can free everyone for lunch. Yes.
So since you have been talking about phishing, so I was just wondering, like, how do you approach towards, phishing kind of stuff, like, phishing over scam, phone calls? So how do you create awareness, like, how do you protect against those stuff?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
I was just wondering, like, is there any way that you can create awareness regarding those phishings, the phishing over phone calls?
Oh, so okay, so awareness for phishing. Yeah, I believe our product does that. We have a training module that does phishing type training. So again, not to be the sales guy, we have a product.
Last one?
In one of the slides, you showed the mostly targeted as like groups of people in the organization, and the first one was CTO and EA. So would that include the, let's say, domain administrators and administrators who have highly privileged credentials, or that is in a different category?
No, so that's everybody org-wide. And so really all of those labels there, those are us looking at the results of said graph and looking at job titles and go, oh, that's what you do to kind of show you who ends up getting bubbled up to the top. Not necessarily domain admins are always the one that are attacked more than the rest.
I just wanted to know what category the domain admin would fall under.
It would really depend on how your AD structure is organized.
If I am the bad guy, I would definitely target the domain administrator, somebody who has a very privileged account, but
Sure.
the LinkedIn profile to see who they are and target them for phishing.
See, I personally, as an attacker, I wouldn't target them as the first source. I would go somewhere else that may not be as guarded as the domain admins, because everybody's looking for attacks to the domain admins. Once you're able to compromise something lesser, you can then pivot into a more highly privileged role, maybe internally. So if you get a unprivileged user, you spam out malware internally. I mean, you don't even necessarily have to spam out in large volume, but then you can send specific targeted emails to the domain admins and go, did you get this document I tried to send you last week? No, well, open it, and then now you're on the domain admin system.
Engineering 101, it's not
Right.
always about access, it's about
Right.
connectivity to the right people.
So you're getting the same end goal, but you're pivoting through least privileged type ways of doing it.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thank you all for the time today. It was nice to meet you.